I think.
Yeah. All right, welcome to the discussion session of Tuesday, May 9th. Sorry, we're starting a little behind schedule, but we're trying to make up the lost time. Let's start with a review of the agenda items. Manager McGill, please.
Thank you, Mr. President. Tonight's agenda, we have the consideration of a resolution designating a depository for the funds of Mount Lebanon. And this would be an additional depository for banking activities, I believe principally isolated to our sewage funds, if that's correct.
For now, yes.
For now, potentially give us some better returns. We also have the consideration of a pollutant reduction plan for Sawmill Run watershed, previously approved plan from 2017. Does not account for the recently constructed stream restoration project on Hornwood Drive. So we had a public hearing last time. We heard information about it 2 meetings ago. This is the final step. We have the consideration of an approval of a minor subdivision plan for 62 Cedar Boulevard to divide the property on which 2 townhouse units have recently been constructed. We have a request for the final approval of an amendment to the site plan for the public works facility at 1250 Lindendale Drive to add a fire training facility. We'll have a presentation this evening. There is no vote being requested from the commission at this meeting. And then finally, we have the consideration for the award of a 5-year lease agreement for golf carts for the Mount Lebanon golf course.
Great, thank you. Next on the agenda, strategic planning report. John Trent is here to walk us through the report.
Am I still connected? If I can see it up there, I'm still connected then. I see. Yeah. Everybody.
Hi.
It's okay. So.
Yeah, I'm sure you.
You are the presenter.
Please.
Okay.
Come on down.
Okay.
That was the, you're here to present.
Good to see everybody again. I'll move whenever.
Good to see you.
So tonight we are at the final step of the strategic planning process. Last I saw you all, we had a day-long session to talk about several issues and aspirations for the community. Today I'm going to review the strategic plan document. I'll focus on the end of the document with the final deliverables in terms of the vision, mission and goals for the various topics. But if you have any questions along the way, feel free to jump in. Everybody should have received the draft in advance to review. And again, if you have any questions, let me know. So with that, we're going to start, and I'm not even going to turn off the first page. Just wanted to point out that our session this year, our strategic planning session, was called Community Visioning, which is different than prior years. So I want to remind everybody and point out that prior years, the strategic planning session was focused on projects. This effort was not focused on projects. This was focused on what staff and we had talked about throughout the process as aspirations, visioning for the community to set a framework for follow-up discussions and planning relative to specific projects. So why are we doing this? There's a lot of important reasons why the municipality goes through the strategic planning process and has done so for several years. I skipped ahead to page 4. In summary, the most important reason is alignment. So to make sure that the commission and the priorities of the commission are aligned with the staff and operations of the municipality, and that the budgeting and funding process is aligned with those priorities and the vision of the commission. The comprehensive plan that I'll talk about, and you're well aware is underway for the community, is much broader. It's a much broader look at multiple facets of the community and includes a lot of public engagement. And that engagement feeds up to the commission, obviously, and helps to inform the priorities and vision of the commission. The purpose of this process was to be much more specific relative to municipal operations and how municipal operations will work towards implementing the priorities of the commission and of the community vis-a-vis the commission, elected officials. So the alignment is one of the top priorities so that everybody's on the same page, and what results is greater efficiency and success. And Mount Lebanon has shown that success over the years, sticking with a consistent strategic planning process to identify priorities, identify priority projects, and align resources behind those projects. On page 5, there's an overview of the process for this strategic planning effort. The process began with a review of ongoing planning efforts, notably the comprehensive plan. The progress of the comprehensive plan was analyzed, and we incorporated input from the comprehensive plan consultant and information that has currently been available from that process that consultant shared with us. So we had the benefit of that information as well, recognizing that that process is midstream. We wanted to have the benefit of that information that was currently available so far with the comp plan. We conducted online surveys. The commission received a survey online, and staff leadership received a survey online, and we'll review briefly the results of those surveys. We then conducted a staff planning session and met with all of the staff leadership to discuss the goals and visions for the community, and also to update the projects that were on the priority list from the last session to understand where their status lies. We then held the retreat, and as I said, the commission met for an entire day here at the Municipal Center to go over all of the aspirations and goals for the community and identify a lot of words. We spent a lot of time drafting a lot of words, but words were important. And in this process in particular, these words mean a whole lot. We then move forward with plan development, which is the document that you see in front of you today. On page 6, as I mentioned, we met with staff and then reviewed with the commission during the day-long retreat the status of the 2021, which was the last strategic planning effort the municipality undertook, the 2021 priority projects. It's important for 2 reasons. Number one, to understand the continuity between the strategic planning efforts and where those projects that were identified as priorities stand in terms of implementation. Also to get understanding of resources. As I said, one of the key priorities or one of the key important aspects of a strategic planning process is that alignment of vision, mission, goals, values, and the resources that you all allocate as commissioners. So we wanted to have an understanding of what projects from the last plan are still underway and have a realistic discussion about moving forward, what projects can be added given available resources. And that was the same discussion that we had in 2021. So it was important to understand where those projects stand. The review of those projects spans a couple of pages. On page 6 and the top of page 7, you'll see there are 6 projects in green. I'll review them briefly. The DEI initiative, the Mount Lebanon Parks and Recreation Center feasibility study, the website redesign, advisory board restructuring, vibrant uptown, and overnight parking ordinance. Those projects in green were identified in 2021 by the commission as the top 6 priorities, given available resources and priorities. And the projects in yellow, 7, 8, 9, and 10, environmental sustainability and climate action plan, complete streets policy, eco district initiative, and operational review of the recreation department, were the next 4 on the list that the commission didn't want to lose sight of, so that as resources became available, those could move up the list in future years. Each of those projects on pages 6 and 7 has a review of their current status. As I said, we then reviewed the comprehensive plan, and on pages 8 and 9, specifically on page 9, there is some good content that the comprehensive plan consultant provided to us, the staff and the commission during this process to get an understanding of what the priorities are bubbling up during the comprehensive planning process. Those include community engagement, mobility and access, and economic development and sustainability, and that informed the process as we move forward. On page 10, advisory board restructuring. So this is really a critical component in terms of how this whole plan is structured and how a lot of things moving forward for the municipality, it appears, will be structured. In February of this year, the commission was enacted on February 28, 2023. The commission enacted ordinance number 3356. And what that did was to create 5 categories or 5 topics by which municipal initiatives, including advisory boards, would be realigned. That realignment was actually a recommendation from the prior strategic planning session. So again, kudos moving forward with the implementation of the priority projects. So that realignment also is expected to inform how the comprehensive plan is organized. And I'll talk briefly at the end, there is some discussion ongoing about creating a dashboard for the municipality and metrics, and those metrics will be organized according to these topics. So it's not just the advisory boards, it's projects and metrics to measure those projects that will be organized according to these topics. Those 5 topics are civic engagement, mobility and transportation, parks and recreation, community sustainability and economic development, and financial management. Great. Thank you for the reminder to advance the slides. As I mentioned, we had a staff planning session. The summary of that session is on page 11, and you'll see that the 5 categories first manifest themselves there in this report in terms of organizing the input we received from staff. On page 12 is the agenda from the retreat. It was a packed day, as you all well know, and a very detailed agenda. And to the commission's credit, everybody stayed engaged and kept moving through the process, and we generated a whole lot of words. And again, words are important. They're not just words, but
Amazing what caffeine and sugar will do.
yes, and a lot of it. My favorite memory will be when everybody went rogue on me because I eliminated a break because of time constraints, and everyone just stood up and said, "We're taking a break." That's fine. We adjust. Okay, beginning on page 13. We're going to dive into the individual topics. I'm briefly just going to hit on the survey results. There's a word cloud there that are useful as much as they are to look at in terms of graphically representing keywords and issues that were identified. So first with the staff survey question, what change would you like to make regarding your department's approach? And the first topic is civic engagement. Continuing on to page 14, what improvements will result from this change? And how can the municipality civic engagement efforts be measured? So all this input was collected from staff for these 3 questions relative to civic engagement. And then on page 15, the commission survey results. The questions were what needs to be improved, what is successful, and what can be measured relative to civic engagement efforts. We reviewed all that information at the retreat and then had a discussion that is shown summarized on page 16 relative to civic engagement. And this discussion was the commission's opportunity to chew on the information they had received and reviewed and just have a talk about what civic engagement means to Mount Lebanon. And you can see on page 16 that there's some highlights, and those highlights include empowering community groups to achieve their goals more independently, emphasizing qualitative metrics, identifying instances in which residents are not getting the information they are seeking. And there was a spotlight on empowerment during this discussion. And that, in summary, is sufficient access to municipal budgets, procedures, and goals to empower community members and groups to effect change and become better stewards for the issues about which they are most passionate. On page 17, we then, sure.
This is going to be on our website, right, Keith? Okay, so just for anybody watching who's obviously not able.
Yeah, we will post it on to
Easily.
present it to the commission first.
Yeah, perfect.
On page 17 begins the mobility and transportation survey results. Same questions, but now the topic is mobility and transportation. So these are the staff survey responses. What changes would you like to make? What results, what improvements would result from that change? And how can the municipality efforts relative to mobility and transportation be measured? On page 18, commission survey results relative to mobility and transportation. And then on page 19 is the discussion about mobility and transportation. Highlighting that discussion, the commission emphasized that active transportation planning will need dedicated funding. We talk a lot about population, demographics, aging population, and youth especially need to be engaged in the mobility and transportation discussion. Identifying ways to measure success will be important, and that recognizing the change will be nuanced and granular. Transportation is nuanced and granular. You can see in the spotlight there. An active transportation plan will establish a framework for the community tying into traffic calming, which will be a design solution as opposed to an enforcement solution. So this discussion really sets the framework for creating that vision, mission, and goals, and with really robust dialogue. I have to really acknowledge you all for a lot of great discussion, taking a ton of information, and we took a lot of notes and we distilled that into these summaries to capture the priorities and what everybody's thinking relative to these topics. Next up on page 20, Parks and Recreation, staff survey responses, and I'm going to speed up a little bit because he said that we need to make up time, and I think that was aimed at me. I'm gonna jump ahead to page 22 in the summary of Parks and Recreation. Identifying ways to engage volunteers, make Parks and Recreation facilities accessible and inviting to all ages and ability levels. Addressing forestry and vegetation upkeep, and exploring options for renovating the recreation center, including collaboration with other municipalities. In terms of spotlighting, just recognizing that the improvements will be accomplished through focused investments consistent with funding and staffing capacities. And again, there was a lot of good discussion about what's realistic and what we can do with available resources. On page 23, we transitioned to the community sustainability and economic development topic. The survey results are on the next few pages. And on page 25 is the summary for community sustainability and economic development. Highlights include questioning how a climate action plan will impact existing and future zoning. The greenest infrastructure, the greenest structures are often those already built. How do we promote sustainability through historic architecture?
Historic preservation.
Historic preservation.
Preservation, yes, not just limited to architecture.
Words are important. Thank you.
Yes.
Talking about the library and it as an asset to the community, and talking about what additional support is needed. The spotlight on zoning and land use, walkable community, mix of land uses, long-term goals that include flexible zoning and creative land use. Sustainability, climate, and business development goals can be accomplished in part through energy efficiency, where appropriate, consider increasing density, and pursuits such as adding height to existing buildings will require amendments to existing zoning regulations. Last, but certainly not least, the financial management starts on page 26. The survey results are the next few pages. Then on page 28 is the summary. Highlights include regional cooperation, more effective billing services equals more efficient delivery of services, exploring grant and loan programs. And the spotlight, in summary, municipal decisions often result in long-term financial commitments that must be honored while new obligations and opportunities arise. And there was a lot of good discussion about what this topic meant and how this will frame future efforts moving forward, because it is a more unique topic. There aren't a lot of projects that necessarily fall into this category. I talked about how at the outset, staff had asked us to frame this year's discussion more as aspirational and facilitate a dialogue with the commission about the community's aspirations. So this page 29, this graphic represents how all these pieces affect and influence the overall aspirations for the community. So our overall aspirations for the next 10 years, that's the vision. If you sort of just follow the chutes and ladders here. 10 years is the vision. What will drive operations? That's our values. Guiding principles, the drive operations is the mission. So the mission is operational focus, the departments, the staff. That's why it's important to engage each department. The guiding principles are the values, and the desired results are the goals. All that discussion leads then to implementing projects that are aligned into those buckets. So now page 30 begins in summary form what the commission identified as vision, mission, values, and goals for each of these topics. On page 30, the civic engagement, and they're each one page. So it's a nice concise summary of what civic engagement means to Mount Lebanon. So our vision for civic engagement is on the top left, the mission, top right, our values at the middle of the page, trust, transparency, honesty, empathy, two-way communication, and the goals at the bottom half of the page. We identified 5 goals, including communicate effectively to engage with customers, maintain strong sense of community through vibrant, safe, and well-attended gatherings, stay ahead with evolving methods of communication, and get necessary information on demand when needed for residents and businesses, and a social contract with the community through the articulation of current or establishment of new common desired outcomes and expectations. I'm not going to read every page and every vision and mission, if that's okay.
Yes.
I just wanted to give some highlights to you. I can certainly
Yeah,
read it to you.
It's a lot of
okay,
pages.
yeah. Page 31.
This quickly going through the hourglass.
I'm circling the runway, Mr. Silverman. Mobility and transportation, page 31. Vision, mission, values, safe, accessible, equitable, multimodal. We identified 4 goals at the bottom of that page. Parks and Recreation on page 32. Vision and mission at the top, our values, safe, responsive, equitable, enjoyable, accessible, and healthy. And we identified 8 goals for Parks and Recreation, including opportunities for expansion of parks, prioritizing approach to organizing and resourcing future facilities and programs.
It's because we don't have enough to do.
I saw him walk in. I'm sure he was late because he was at a meeting or running some new program or something, juggling plates, you know.
Missed it. She said that rec parks and rec. don't
Didn't have enough to do, that's why we gave you 8. Yeah,
Thank
free
you.
to just, you know.
Okay, you know, the opposite's true.
Page 33, sustainability and economic development. Our vision, mission, and our values, vibrant, resilient, equitable, adaptable, unique, historic character. We identified 6 goals for sustainability and economic development. Financial management on page 34. Transparency, efficiency, stewardship, proactive, and growth-oriented are our values, and the commission identified 4 goals for financial management. The commission asked for a summary vision, and this will be helpful to inform the comprehensive planning process as well as they work on the overarching vision for the community at large. So this is the vision for each topic all on one page. So a nice summary of those 5 topics and the visions for the community for those 5 topics. I mentioned that this structure will help align the projects moving forward with the municipality, and on page 36, this identifies the projects that are on the current list and yet to be completed and which of the 5 topics that they address. There was some discussion and some seeds planted about a community dashboard. This has been a topic that's been discussed over a couple of the strategic planning efforts. And there is an effort underway to have a continued discussion about how the dashboard would be developed. And these topics could organize that dashboard. And we also talked about what could be measured for each of those topics. And those are identified on page 37. Moving forward on page 38 and the last page. Thankfully, it seems.
It was
It's a beautiful night out.
I don't even want to talk to the last page.
So the most important page, I would say, is what to do next. So step 1, we issued the plan, that is complete, May 2023. Step 2, follow-up discussion, that's tonight, May 2023. Step 3 is a much more meatier step in compared to the first 2, and that's to align the new boards and the advisory boards and commissions with the vision and goals and identify the transition of goals and various initiatives that those boards are currently working on to be aligned with this new structure pursuant to the resolution or the ordinance adopted by the commission in February. That's May through December. Concurrently, June through December, the comprehensive plan will be underway, is continuing to be underway. Staff will work to fold this effort in with the comprehensive planning effort and make sure there is alignment there. As I said, the alignment is key. And then finally, step 5 will be to do it all over again next year and with a refocus on projects again. So at that time, we'll go the same thing. What have you accomplished that was on the list? And then what do we want to add to the list and how can we possibly measure those things and put them on a dashboard?
Drill into projects, not do it all over again, do another
Drill
strategic
into more
session.
projects, right?
Yes.
Yes.
Not redo it.
John loves it enough, he wants to do it again.
I'd be happy to spend more time with you and talk about visioning and strategic planning. So I apologize if I didn't save enough time, Keith, but I skipped a few pages there. My plan was to read the entire document. I think we shaved a few minutes off.
Thank you for not reading all the appendices, we appreciate that.
Yeah, the appendices include all the survey results and all the information that was used.
Does Commissioner have any
Thank you.
comments, questions, or always we're part of all this, so I don't know if there's anything more to add. I mean, this is a great summary, and thank you. And as you said, how does this tie into the comprehensive plan? Because obviously we're taking this and pivoting to the next 10 years. But I don't know if anybody else has any thoughts, questions, comments. Going once, going twice. Thank you, John.
Thank you.
Appreciate you doing it.
Good to see you all again
Likewise.
John, you'll just send me that one amendment.
with the board change.
Yeah, for sure, and I'll get it.
I'll send it in the PDF. Yep.
Thank you.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Next on the list is the Brick Street policy in McBean's and Matt Backley. Come on down.
I'm sure you're. Great. Oh. Good thing you guys are here for the pro tips.
You guys are only 6 minutes behind schedule.
Okay.
I thought the comment Keith made was for me. Talking too much.
Could be either one of us. I could vary for us. So thank you, commissioners. I know we've talked a lot about this topic. So the direction that we received the last time we presented to the commission on brick streets was to come back to the group with a draft policy that was one that incorporated the previous iterations from staff, from the Carnegie Mellon Group, from the Historic Preservation Board, from a couple commissioner inputs. Kind of synthesize that all together, run it through the solicitor who looked through this. He's over my shoulder. Usually he's on this side that I can turn and point to him, but he's back there. So this had some solicitor input as well. And then present something to the commission for review and discussion. So in your packets, there was the draft policy that went through those iterations of review, along with the compendium piece of the street list, which is Appendix A on the policy. And as I noted in my memo, off the list up here, as I noted in my memo, there were the spreadsheet here is set up kind of like you're used to seeing your budget sheets that, you know, as the recommendation column is changed, the numbers across the top will also change. So if there's further discussion on streets or even individual street segments, we can, you know, kind of tweak the spreadsheet as we go to kind of see what the mileage of preservation is, what the annual cost is in total, what the incremental cost is. So the incremental cost is brick over asphalt. The annualized cost is just the total cost of brick, not taking out the asphalt. So I know we've discussed both over time. And then the tax millage equivalent of those numbers as well. So there are several streets on the keep list.
And let me ask a question. The annualized cost of $500,000 a year is brick over asphalt, assuming the current PCI numbers, right?
It's no, the annualized cost is the cost. It's basically the streets that are labeled as keep on this spreadsheet
Cost this much to keep
cost this much
over
per year.
asphalt, assuming
Over asphalt.
we're going to maintain the same PCI, because we have 2 to 3
PCI
million.
didn't factor in. It was, if you wanna, because we took, thinking back like 4 presentations ago, which was probably about a year ago.
Right.
We said, this is the total cost of ownership of a brick street
Yes.
over its 60-year life.
Yes,
So that total cost is this life cycle total cost up there.
yes.
So like for Hoodridge, or let me use a different example.
But
so
we
small
can-
little sections.
Reconstruct no asphalt streets for the next decade, only reconstruct brick. And spend the same exact budget that we spend on street reconstruction.
That's a
Yes.
commission decision.
Yes.
Yeah, no,
if we-
she's asking.
If we did that, yes. And it wouldn't cost extra money,
I mean,
because we're using our asphalt
Well,
money.
if you keep doing that over time, everything deteriorates to a point,
To a point of 60, which is exactly what our ordinance says it should be.
right? But that's, again, that's over time, right,
Yes.
we need to maintain something. So what we're doing here is we're setting the floor. If our PCI is 60, and we say, and we want to preserve brick streets, for a certain period of time, there may be capacity in current budget to just work on brick. But at some point, that will not be the case. And we want to have a floor that says, you still have to keep PCI 60,
As long as our
and
PCI
you have to keep preserving the brick.
And here's our budget. It's only whatever it is. We're not giving you more money.
Right, but they should be budgeting to sustain
Exactly.
both the 60 PCI and the brick.
Let's do that.
That's what we're doing.
Okay, great. But it doesn't cost any extra money, though. It doesn't cost an extra $500,000 a year.
Yes, it does. Over time, it will inherently.
It-
Right now, in the short term, it might not.
Not if we degrade our streets to 60.
But yeah, but again, at some point, you're gonna hit 60,
Yes,
and then we're gonna have to start spending more.
but it stays at 60 because we mill in asphalt and it's cheaper.
Alright.
That's what the last public discussion we had said, is that we'll get a 60. If we do nothing, we spend no extra money, we keep all of our brick streets, we get 60.
keep in mind in that presentation too, we said currently we're at a 79.
Yes.
Or like a 71.
Yes,
So over 20 years, if we spend the same dollars we're spending today,
exactly.
over the next 20 years, we'll go from a 78 to a 60 over
Yes.
that 20-year period. But then after 20 years, it's still gonna continue to go down.
We didn't see those.
So it
We-
would,
we
well,
did
it's,
that
it's,
forecast.
it's what budget period, we picked a 20-year budget window. Do we want to plan a 20-year budget, a 30-year budget, a 80-year budget? I mean, it's,
Sure.
there's so many variables that go into that budget based on with material costs and construction costs over these last few years have varied substantially.
We have
So
to
it's, there's a lot of different things, but I think that to Commissioner Flynn's point, I think right now we can develop any sort of scenario we want to look at for streets that we're looking, like for the brick streets that we deem that we want to keep as
Well,
brick.
sure.
It's just, I think the first step is which streets do we want to keep as brick? And then we can run the various scenarios from there, because that does factor into
Yeah,
the overall budget.
I guess I want commission to consider, it's 500,000, assuming a PCI of 79. So that's,
Well,
Yeah,
I think that's.
This number did not factor in
So-
PCI. This was simply to explain the math in brief. Like, let's take Adeline, the total life cycle cost of Adeline Avenue, 'cause it's the first one alphabetically, I'm not picking on a municipal employee who lives there. Is, 810,000. So total 60-year cost, 810,000 for Adeline.
yes.
What does that include?
And where that came from was, if you look at that cell, that 6.6 million, where that comes from is, remember 2 years ago when we did Parkway Drive
Yeah.
as a brick street and as an asphalt street? We took that, and there was a 60-year life cycle analysis that was done as part of that process to see if we compared reconstruction versus brick over 60 years, what is the asphalt cost, what is the brick cost? And what we looked at there was the brick, the initial investment of reconstructing as brick, and then periodic maintenance of brick rehab, like we do now, like with some brick maintenance over at 20 years and at 40 years. We had some brick maintenance and then some more brick maintenance. And what we looked at there was over 60 years, that life cycle cost was that 6.6 million
For 1 mile.
for 1 mile of road. So when you look at Adeline is 646 feet. So you take that 6.6 million, divide it by the percentage of a mile that it is, and that's how you come up with that cost.
Yeah.
And at the same point, there was a reconstruction cost as well for that same Parkway Drive. So that incremental difference was the 60-year reconstruction cost versus the 60-year asphalt reconstruction cost versus the 60-year brick reconstruction cost. And that incremental difference was what you see there is that
That was,
annual.
that was the April 22nd, 2022 presentation that I gave.
Let me just, I have a quick question. The number that we have for annual incremental cost, are those numbers based on current asphalt costs or are those based on 2022 asphalt costs? Because that's a difference of like 100%, right?
So last year, what we saw was that, yes, the asphalt index did increase substantially. And what ended up happening, because we have not going too far into, but with the liquid fuels that we pay for our mill and overlay program, it ended up equating to, I think it was about a $20,000 increase due to the asphalt, simply the asphalt index increase over our $400,000 program. So it ended up being a 5% increase. But then there is a year over year cost that did also increase. So there was a 5% increase that was strictly due to that asphalt index that happened between March and the time we paved versus the year over year cost, which was probably more like 15% or something like that, 15. So
And when we did,
Which
in back
numbers
in
did we
2022, when we did the 60-year analysis, we factored in inflation over the 60-year time period.
So that
So, yeah, I don't,
6.6 million includes inflation.
yeah.
Can I just,
So just backing up big picture here, because I'm trying to summarize the direction I was given by the commission and what I'm presenting to you. So if I can do that, then you all can discuss. So the direction I was given was to show kind of the overall cost. So, and the obvious differences, so Yeah, then that's the life cycle total cost. The life cycle incremental cost would be, you know, what the street would cost less what the asphalt cost would be to preserve that street. Then the annualized incremental cost, the number in orange is basically just this number, the life cycle incremental cost divided by 60 years. So at the last go around of this presentation, you know, there were streets that, you know, the staff went through and said, we recommend keeping these streets, we recommend replacing these streets, and we're uncertain on a few streets. So I met with Commissioner Ranney, who is the commission liaison to the Historic Preservation Board, and Commissioner Squire Wilson, who is formerly on the Historic Preservation Board, and went through the street list to discuss with the goal of eliminating the maybe streets. So we discussed all the maybe streets, but also there were some streets that our group was divided on between what the staff recommendation had been and what the two commissioners felt. So those are the ones that appear in yellow as divided. But if we change, so if you just watch the spreadsheet, like with the budget, if we change this one to keep, it changes the numbers up at the top, so you can see the impact that things have from a budgetary standpoint. So, you know, we can kind of play around with this, discuss. Right now, you know, the commission had directed me to bring back a draft policy and a list, so this is what I'm presenting to you for discussion and further direction on where you want to go from here.
And I want to thank you for doing that.
You gotta talk fast, so we shut up.
Thank you. So now, okay, great. Thank you, Commissioner Flynn. You were
I was just gonna say, are the numbers correct? No, the numbers are wrong. The numbers are a proxy to help us understand the long-term carry cost of the brick that we want to preserve. They're not gonna be right. And the numbers are gonna evolve over time. Hopefully, right, more and more municipalities are gonna start adopting brick. And it's gonna drive prices down because more and more people are doing brick and therefore the prices come down. I don't think that'll happen, but let's hope. But at least this gives us an understanding of what we are asking staff to bring forward to future commissions in perpetuity from a proxy perspective in terms of what's this gonna cost, right? Again, if I go build a new building, what's this carry cost gonna be? I think for the last many years, we kind of ignored brick.
Oh, yeah.
So the question becomes, okay, if we're going to proactively maintain, what should we generally be anticipating is going to be coming in the budget every year? For me, that's, again, is this number correct? No, the number is wrong, but it's directionally, it gives us a directional sense of what we are asking in the future to be committing from a funding perspective. So again, is the short term, right? Is there flexibility in the current short term? Yes, potentially. But over time, we are going to need to carry this infrastructure, and it does have an incremental cost above and beyond brick. Hopefully, over time, again, staff can drive the price down.
And I don't want to like talk about the assumptions or any little details about how we got to that number either. What I do want to ask though is during budget session, we can talk about all of the streets together as one line item. So brick plus asphalt. That's what we're gonna fund.
Well, we did it at the last budget session we had on our items.
We didn't do any brick reconstruction at all.
What we had,
There was a
the
separate
item
plug.
to say, set aside $600,000.
That's what I don't want to do. I want a total number. Here's what we're spending on streets. We're gonna agree it's 2.5 like every year, 2.8 like every year. Then we'll have a separate discussion about, you know, we'll hear the recommendations of the engineers of public works on what that is, whether that's brick or asphalt. And why?
But if we're seeing here and saying round numbers, with everything that's so far, let's just keep it so forth, our annual increased cost.
Brick's gonna cost more. So do we
Right.
give them more money?
But well, and that's where commission year after year,
That's a
year is
budget
gonna have to decide $500,000 more. Do we want to say we're gonna spend 2.5 rather than 2 million?
But I don't wanna have, after we pass this policy, I no longer wanna talk about whether or not we're gonna fund brick streets. We decided to fund it. We'll talk about how we're gonna.
I agree with Commissioner Ranning.
But that's
That's
something
different.
again where commission's gonna hit that every time in budget.
They'll
You know, that's gonna be.
They'll hit a total number once at budget, then
Right.
again, when they see what the list of streets are.
But you're not having a separate conversation about brick streets.
We're not having a
Yes,
separate
yes,
line item about
Commissioner
brick
Ranning's point.
streets anymore.
They are going to be preserved.
Yes.
In the total budget, we're having one conversation about street reconstruction and street repairs. Or we have to have repairs separate,
Once you-
because it's under a different item, okay, fine. Repairs and reconstruction. Two buckets.
current commission cannot bind future commissions. We can give direction.
We can start right now for
So
this
we
budget
say-
season.
So if we say, this is the goal, let's say,
Right.
that's the goal, that's the target, that's the plan, that's whatever. The point you made earlier of going, hey, we may decide for 1 year saying, hey, we're banking that OCI of 7.9. We're gonna redirect the funds such that we afford it. Right? And that could be a year by year decision,
Yes.
depending on how the streets degradate. Do we suddenly get much more money in liquid fuel funds, whatever? But at least hopefully today, I think if we're looking for a decision point today, we say, looking at this spreadsheet to say we've got the keep. We've got the replacement with the asphalt, we have to divide it. So it seems to me our decision points are, one, are we comfortable with that which is already classified as keep? Two, are we comfortable with that which is classified as replace? And three, what the heck can we do with the divided?
Yeah, that's the main point today. But I do want to make sure we budget differently.
So. I want us to change some language because we heard that words were important. I don't like the word replace, and the reason being that I'm looking at PSIs of 70s on a lot of these. And I don't want to give permission to start blowing away brick streets
Or give the
If it's
impression
not-
to residents that's what we're trying to
if
do.
it's not absolutely necessary. And to that point, I would like to have a very robust public process in the policy itself to make the decision for anything to be blown away. I'm gonna say it one more time. These are historic assets. Once they're gone, they're gone. And really, one of the things we have that makes us unique is our historic assets. You blow them away, we're done.
So then why didn't we just keep them all?
Well, I mean, you don't have, you could put status quo and then, if you want to think about when they come up, when the PSI drops a lot.
These are the ones we'll have a discussion
Yeah,
about when they're,
but just the
But
word
we're
alone.
still punting.
we're funding all the green for sure. And the red, we don't know if we want to fund it. Give us a proposal, we might not fund it.
And I just
No,
chime in
they're
real
just
quick,
leaving.
and one of the
Needs to be
reasons,
changed.
in the policy itself, under procedures, section 1 specifies brick streets at the end of their useful life. So like
Right.
a street with a 70+ PCI
It
is
shouldn't be
not
going anywhere.
near the end of its useful life,
Right.
right? I tried to write the policy kind of around the feedback I was hearing from the group based on our past discussions, which was the group wanted to consider brick streets similar to other streets, just as part of the overall road program. So that like this year, when we did the street reconstruction program, you had a presentation from the engineer said, these are the streets up for reconstruction. And as part of that, some of those might be brick streets we're replacing with brick, some of those might be asphalt streets, some of those might be concrete streets, whatever they are, it's just the overall street reconstruction program would include asphalt, brick, whatever else, all together as one. So the streets we're considering for reconstruction would be the lowest PCI ones, because those are the ones that pop to the top of the reconstruction program.
Yeah, streets that were in that 70 wouldn't be on the reconstruction program. Just because it's on a replace doesn't mean it's being replaced.
No, I know, but I think language is important.
I understood,
You know.
took that from the.
I mean, it's just.
presentation.
I really, it's. When you're trying to set an ethic for future. Commissions, the language you put into this is important. And if the ethic is we're gonna preserve our history. We can't preserve everything, I get it. But we want to preserve as much as we can that makes any kind of financial sense. And so language becomes important in this document, in any document.
Right, and I want to make sure, one, you had said, don't replace a brick street until it's absolutely necessary, but I didn't write down the other one.
And God only knows what it was.
However we want to take it, the good news it's recorded.
Yes, Keith will
Someone
remember.
write it down and we'll get it.
Keith remembers.
That's
And
right.
in some ways, there's a little bit of conflicting, Direction?
From the commission, which is,
because.
Yeah.
What I heard was, look. We want to have a list, and then we, as part of our annual budget for streets, we don't want to talk about brick, we don't want to talk about asphalt. We just
We're
want
gonna
to
talk about
what's
is
the budget
bricks. That's
Right.
about
and
the
which
whole
streets are
budget.
we putting on that list.
Yes.
Then I also heard we need to have more in the policy about a more robust public process. If you
Around
start-
brick streets, yeah.
If you start to introduce that, how does that fit from a timeline standpoint into what we're trying to do from a budget standpoint? Because we are going to begin working on the budget in June preliminarily, already started. So again, how does the timing relate if we've got, and I'm just gonna pick a street, and get rid of the wording, but let's, one of the ones that was potential street for this year was Craig Court.
Yep.
Right?
Mhm.
So I'm gonna go out on a limb and say that condition's probably not gonna improve when we get to next year's list, right? So how do we then sort of balance that request for a more robust public process with what we need to do from a budget standpoint? I'm just trying to figure out the timing of how this all fits together.
Well, that and to my point earlier saying, is we're trying to give direction to say, do we, let's say, have, the commission support to say, we want to keep these 8.15 miles of streets keep us brick. Do we have commission support to say, this stuff that is, alleys and so forth, that totals 0.86 miles replaced with asphalt? Do we have commission support for that? Get back to giving direction. And then finally, the divide it. To say, how does the group feel about those streets? And staff said some one thing, two commissioners felt something else. So maybe starting with, I hate to say starting with easy, because I'm not sure what's the easiest, but starting with the ones that are replaced with asphalt, because two of those streets were streets we delayed in the last second. So is commission comfortable with the stuff that staff has said? When the appropriate time comes up, when the OCI makes sense, that when it's time to replace those get replaced with asphalt. That 0.86 miles. Are there 3 votes of commission to say those set of streets would be replaced with asphalt? Yes or no? And if we're not sure, we're already getting to past budget time of this. We have a little discussion, another, because we have something else on the list we have to talk about as besides our IDA meeting. So we're.
Or we can push the other thing if it's not important.
I don't know if the IDA we have to have as far as.
I know,
the
but
Yeah,
outfit,
you have to
I
have the
don't know
IDA.
if that's required or not.
I'll put it this way.
I am willing to see an additional $510,000 and us make an ongoing effort to raise sufficient funds to support brick, under the current model to 510,000.
I would take it a step further and just say fund them all at 610. It's another 100,000.
Is that all including the alleys?
610 is if you keep everything.
Everything. I'm gonna vote with Andrew on the 510, but that's some separate votes there.
So all of, if we convert all the
Yeah,
divided.
if I may for a second.
Sorry.
So Mr. Grella has said, if I'm hearing right, fund all 3 categories as brick.
It's just a matter of coming up with a number, right?
Well,
That's what
I
we
mean,
talked about
based
for
on
the
these
other
estimates, 610 would
510,
seem to
yeah,
be,
5, 6, 10.
would tend to be everything.
Sure.
If that's your intention. I'm hearing.
Because at the end of the day,
different
we have to vote on this when it comes to budget time anyway.
Mhm.
So like,
Mhm.
this is I feel like this is where we started this conversation.
Right.
Let's figure out what that cost is over however many years. Bring it back to an annualized amount. That number is gonna be different than if we say, let's put this in place for X number of years or Y number of years, but whatever this number is, 60 years, the annual incremental amount is gonna be 600,000 for these roads. We say, great, that's our number. We still have to reconcile that against Rudy's tree program, the police budget, the fire budget, the legal budget, Andrew's candy budget.
That's right.
All of that has to come back for a vote. So.
Candy budget stays.
We can have asphalt, if we want to.
Right, so I would, I would rather just set something that, because I feel like this is just what I feel. I feel like we've gone back and forth on this so many times. And I feel like we have factions of the commission that are trying to save brick no matter what. We have factions of the commission who don't care. And we have factions of the commission who are really trying to see the numbers and be like, hey, well, let's make a pragmatic decision, which we're gonna have to do anyway. So I feel like, we're setting policy for other things. Let's set the policy that we want, figure out the cost. We gotta bring it back in the middle anyway and say, we can't do it. Because at some point, sounds like very soon, we're gonna be staring at numbers that are like, here's what we have to work with. 400,000, okay, great. I know our policy said we're gonna spend 6, but we have 4, so let's do these 10 streets.
Well, and I go back to, at some point, someone can make the decision that we can issue debt to rebuild Brick Street.
Yes.
But,
Unless you amend our ordinance,
but,
as we're not allowed to borrow streets.
well, okay, but we could. But again, the issue there is that we still have to have taxing capacity to carry the debt.
Yeah.
So however you fund it, whether it's pay-go or borrowing money, which would require an ordinance change, you still have to have taxing capacity to address these things.
Or don't do asphalt. I keep saying that.
But that's a short term,
One-ish.
that's a short term thing, right? I have to have capacity in the system to maintain my streets at the level we want with a fixed PCI and with a fixed number of brick. Right? I have to build capacity to do that. And right now, we don't have that capacity and we're ignoring bricks. So,
That's what we've been doing for decades.
That's
Which
what
is
we've been doing.
causing more and more problems with the bricks.
so at some point, we have to pick
Gotta
a
start
number of
fixing
house
them.
brick and say, we're gonna build the capacity somehow over time to carry the brick. That's the whole exercise.
And I think what we need. We need to make a determination of what's important to this commission, because we know already. We're not going to have enough money to do all this, unless we say right now, we're going to pull, and I don't know what our numbers are looking like, Andrew, you probably don't either, because we don't have all this done yet, but. Unless we said, by any means necessary, we're gonna find that 610, right? Whether that includes raising taxes so we can get to that 610, like take that one thing out. Add it on top of whatever we finish the budget on. And if we have a shortfall, that's what we raise taxes, right? I don't think anyone's saying that now, but unless we did that, then we knew we'd have that money for that. We don't know how things are gonna shake out with, last year we spent money fixing sidewalks in front of the fire department, and we know we have some other deferred maintenance that we need to look at. So unless we say this is on a priority list higher than, say, trees or sanitary or our stormwater, then we're always gonna be bringing this back to some space where we're looking at every dollar, every year, every road that we either do or don't want to fix.
But we do anyway. We have a public discussion. There's recommendations on how to fix. We debate, we look over it. We do it.
Just to try and count noses, for instance, to say, all right. Commissioner Grella had said basically, if I've heard it right, the whole number.
You said 610, you said 505.
You said 510, I said 510.
My concern with going 510 is this, if that's what we do and we kind of identify these, whatever, 12, 15 streets as will be replaced, the commission will see, instead of the brick streets reconstructed as brick that have the low PCIs, we'll see the lower numbers on the bricks that are to be replaced, reconstructed as asphalt. And that's not the direction I wanted to go. Does that make sense? Okay, let me say this again.
You're too frowny face.
If I don't do the whole thing, if I don't say all 610. And if I agree to the 505, which I think in theory is a decent compromise, I'm willing to agree to the 505. I think the direction of the municipality will be to start to pick off the brick streets to be constructed as asphalt, but replace. Not the reconstructed brick, just brick.
Can I ask
The
you a
lowest
question?
PCIs are under under P.
Well, let me ask you a question, with the idea of the 505. We have 2 streets that we had to punt on this year.
Those are the lowest PCIs.
But my question still, they were on the list, Craig Court and,
We have 30s, we have lots of 30s, we have a 27.
right, but I'm saying, okay, let's take,
27
let's take,
alley.
let's take for argument's sake, for me, this, I think your was 37.
And connecting's 33.
I was like, 33, Navajo is 28. My point is to say, thinking if that's the low number that comes up, to say, It's a 28 in Navajo, we gotta fix it, we gotta do something. Commission, it's on the list, what do you do? It's one thing to say, okay, we're saying this 505. It's nothing to say, yeah, but as we're allocating that 505.
Right.
There's certain streets that we are recognizing. We just have to make cuts somewhere,
Yeah.
you know, and that's what I'm trying to get you, say, if we say, our goal is to say the 505. I think we still have to give some direction to say, yes, 505, yes, we prefer to have brick, but we recognize there are certain streets that when their number is up, they are not gonna be brick again, they're gonna be asphalt.
So I want to say yes, 505, and if I can see some brick streets to be reconstructed next year. As
Or
brick,
at least. repair.
Well, but back to the lowest OCI or PCI, it may turn out that
Yeah.
as much as we want to get there, maybe there are other streets that are more pressing. I mean, I don't know if we had a long discussion about Parkway, you know, where that
Yeah,
was.
Berkeley was a.
I don't know if Parkway would wind up being the next one up.
So
be done, or
yeah, Parker's
or
the
whatever.
32.
And so that's right, giving direction. One is the budgetary number. And two is I think we really have to make some of these uncomfortable decisions to say, I'm sorry, when that finally happens, that street has to be replaced. It's not asphalt anymore. That cul-de-sac or that, you know, that short, whatever. So that's where, to me, there's two questions. One is the funding amount. And certainly I've heard 3 votes for that, say 505, agree. That's one piece. The other is, you know, these streets on the list. So Gateway knows it's not just the dollar value for the commission, it's, hey, I got these streets. Should they stay or should they go?
And to your example, Iroquois is like just that little section right next to Iroquois
bottom.
Park.
Right.
So
Yeah,
it's
it's
right
just
at the bottom.
Right.
It's disconnected from everything.
Right.
And just as a quick clarification, since you mentioned Navajo, the only Navajo section we're talking about is the red dead end portion that, you could wind up like on the roof of Med Express if you went over the hill. So that's the only portion of Navajo we're talking about replacing with other materials is just that dead end portion, not the rest of Navajo. So just wanted to.
Let's hope everybody's brakes work. So back to trying to, you know, get some direction for staff. I mean. Okay, 3 votes, let's say for the 505. Are the 3 votes for this replace list?
That's the same thing. 505 means replace, right? I mean, that's the replace.
Yeah, I'm suggesting 505, if we want to move some things, we'll move them. But let's pick a number and whatever that list is that we ultimately decide on. If it's the green keep list, then that's the list.
And the green keep list fits with the 505 number.
Oh, no, I thought it's
So-
divided plus.
Well, no, I was looking at this
Oh.
spreadsheet, I see 504, 8, 12, whatever, and that's the total for all the stuff that's in green.
I'm sorry, I gotta change my answer. I thought it was both. I thought it
If you
was
convert
divided
the,
plus-
I started to do that and then Commissioner Silverman asked me to wait. So if you convert the divided to keep, it becomes 557. Essentially.
Right, and like the memo where he's got
Yeah.
that, you know, the keep his brick is 504, 813. Replace with asphalt roughly 53,000. Divided is roughly 52,000, so that's where.
Back to you, Ann, then. What number are you at?
I'm not at a number is, I mean, 505, 610, whichever, but really what I'm zeroing in on are the PCIs. Is what to me, we ought to be talking about most of all. I mean, when you look down on this list,
There
Are-
are 46 of these streets that have a PCI lower than what we say we
Right,
want to
yeah.
maintain.
and aren't those
absolutely.
ones we should be talking about fixing?
But
You know.
for me, the PCI is if we say our direction to our engineers is that we want you to recommend back to the commission the streets that most desperately need to be addressed.
Right, the
Regardless of
PCIs, yeah.
road service, just they got the lowest PCI, bring them us. And
Lowest PCI, and what can you do with the dollars where you might be taking sections of a street to repair as opposed to digging up the whole street? mean, I think you put it back in your job to say, okay, I got a PCI of 32, I can do half of this street, I can do another half of another. I mean, you know,
As brick.
as brick, yes. Yes, as brick. And I would be focusing on the lower PCI ones. I mean, I look at something like Barth Avenue, which I drove through today, and you know what the problem is. There's no drainage.
That's the
We don't
dead
have
end that
any
goes.
drainage. No, Barth is not. Barth is not a dead end. It's an historic district. And there's not one,
You want to put that on-
no drainage.
Yeah, be very-
So,
Just one.
I mean, Anyway.
I don't think.
yeah, that's okay. That's all right.
One of the questions I have, when we discussed this earlier, it started with a comment that Andrew made, but it
Yeah.
made a lot of sense. Like, we talked about saying, let's look at the roads and let's look at how much it's gonna cost us over a certain period of time.
Mhm.
And let's consider whatever quality, and we pin that to an OCI, right? So we want to maintain, I'm just gonna say a number, 60 OCI. And we want to look at how much that's gonna cost over 30 years, and then bring that back to an annual cost. That way, if we decide we're gonna fund it at that level, the idea is that over the lifetime, all of those roads will then reach that and be maintained at that.
Mhm.
Now, we might get some benefit of the higher OCI roads not actually coming down to that level, right? Just by nature of how new some of them are. But over time, if we continue maintaining that level, the idea would be in perpetuity, we would have roads at a certain PCI. So the idea was, let's set that PCI that we're happy with. Let's figure out what that number is, and let's figure out a way to fund it. And that way, we don't have to pick streets. All we have to do is say, we're funding $700,000 a year. Go figure it out, because the idea is over 10 years, 20 years, whatever that timeline is, all the roads get maintained at that consistent level. Now, looking at a list like this, which we would have to do anytime, there may be some roads on this list, depending on the mileage and the really bad OCI roads, where we might have to say to somebody who lives on one of the roads that has a 62, that their road may actually degrade below a 60 before we actually end up fixing it,
Absolutely.
right? But over time, the plan is sound, the number is sound, because we have a number that we know we have to hit. We could plan to that number. We don't have to have conversations about which road do we fix here, or which road do we fix there. It's one policy, one number over the course of 30 years. We're not locking in future commissions. We're making a sound decision now. If the next commission decides to change it, it would be just like any policy we make now anyway.
Ultimately, can I make one, sorry, can I make one clarifying comment? So I think there's some misunderstanding on the PCI that right now, the way the comp plan reads is that the goal is an average score of PCI,
Right.
not that 60 is a minimum. So.
But as we're
that's
fixing roads,
clear.
it'll all come back. That average would presumably change as we're fixing roads. If it costs more money to fix brick, presumably, we would be seeing a lowering average over a period of time.
Right.
I
The
just
question is whether it gets to that 60 or not.
of the bell curve of our streets,
basically,
60 is the
yes.
middle, so half the streets will be below, half will be above. That 60 is not the minimum point. It'd be a
Understood.
vastly different budget number if you want 60 to
Sure.
be the minimum.
I understand.
versus
Got it. Yeah.
Across the board. The idea would be that the average would probably come down over
Time.
until a certain period of time. And then we would be maintaining at whatever that number is. We might get some benefit over some of the ones that have been fixed for a certain period of time, but over that lifetime, we will hit that number if we continue that program.
And utilities comes and gives us stuff. Yeah.
Is I'm not sure even allocating is the right word, is we're strategizing with dollars. And saying, if we decide we are going, look, the dollars and cents, for alleys. That we just said, look, there's only so much road budget money around. We don't wanna say our goal is to save every brick alley. And that's back to, okay, that's part of what that overall number is, or the direction we're giving to the engineers to say, okay, we've got a bunch here that are dead ends or alleys. Do we say, we would rather not replace those so that that money can then be deployed elsewhere to preserve these or replace these brick streets or keep these brick streets that are more high volume. You know, you look at, on the streets here that are replacing cul-de-sac, cul-de-sac, cul-de-sac. Alley, on the divided, one cul-de-sac, now there's locals, at what point do we say, look, we need, well, I know that's, but that's,
I mean, I don't
but
mind
that's, but
if
that's,
you wanna
that's the.
keep them status quo, but I just don't want it to be the excuse that we then go in and blow them away and replace them with that. You know,
Well, I mean, the idea is that when the time comes.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think we should be replacing a street before we have to. That doesn't seem
right,
proper use of money. When the time comes to say that street needs to be replaced, something's gotta be done.
Mhm.
We should have some direction to say, what do we want to be done with that alley? When it's time, when that alley finally comes up, do we say that we spend, we have to lose more because we want to preserve that alley in brick?
sure.
Or do we say,
Understand.
no, that alley we get is gonna be asphalt? And so that's part of the discussion that, we need to give some direction to staff. Having given that speech, we have about 7 minutes before we have to go to IDA.
Just to go back what I said, we wouldn't have to make that decision. If we have agreed upon a number that we are going to fund every year, and we agree upon that OCI, it avoids making that decision.
On contrary, that at some point, we're still looking, going, the OCI, the dollar amount, and they're coming in and saying, here's the list of streets to address, and if there's streets on there that are, let's say, alleys, we're saying, well, that's what they recommend, or
Yeah,
we
so
say,
that's-
here is a
What I'm
strategy
saying
to
is,
say-
if we pick a number, right, and if we pick an OCI and we pick an amount, and we fund that amount, the streets that get fixed are almost meaningless, because over our time period, all of the streets will be fixed. What we would be saying in that policy is that we understand that there are lots of streets that need fixed, and we've been tackling them in a piecemeal amount. Pick this one OCI, this because of money, this because of half this street and that street. What we'd be saying is, we are adopting a 10 or 20 or 30-year plan to make sure that our streets are maintained at an OCI of X. It's going to cost Y dollars per year. And by agreeing to that and actually funding it to that Y dollars per year, we are saying that the streets are going to get tackled in whatever order they need to be tackled.
And you saying preserve them all as brick?
Exactly. Preserve them however
You're
we
saying-
want to preserve. If we saying now, preserve all the brick,
Preserve them all as brick.
preserve all the asphalt that we have,
Here's our money. here's our
Understanding what-
PCI. Yeah.
what will need to be reconstructed after a normal lifetime, bring that back to an equation, come up with a number. If we're doing a 10-year plan, that requires more frequent maintenance, so that number is going to be higher, right? If we push it out over 20 years, that number presumably would be lower.
Yeah, we said
The
20
20-year
years.
number might be unpalatable too. But whatever it is, if we say this is our plan, that's how we're doing it, then we don't have to have a street by street conversation.
I'm not convinced, but I'll ask the engineers.
I guess my only clarification, when a street comes up that is currently brick, at some
Right,
point,
and
it'll
that's,
just always
and
be
that thing
brick,
is
is what
always
you're
brick.
saying.
Yeah, with that policy, it's always brick.
1 year,
Well, but
if we're heavy on the bricks,
alleys,
Shotway, it's an alley.
yeah, I mean.
And that, with that recommendation, it'd all be brick.
whatever we do, if we even decide that Shotway is one that we're maintaining,
We wouldn't just ignore it, yeah.
if it's a publicly maintained road, it goes on the list. We have to have a separate
Alleys.
conversation about what we do with alleys in general, but we haven't tackled that one yet.
That'll impact your.
Private roads,
That
people
impacts the
streets.
number and that impacts how we bid things out. And we kind of need an overall
Sure.
how we approach this. So when it's presented to the
Right.
commission, like Matt's street reconstruction presentation a few weeks ago, right? He came in, think of that presentation again, but would say, okay, here's the streets that are currently concrete that we're gonna replace. Here's the streets that are currently asphalt that we're gonna replace. Here's the streets that are brick that we're gonna replace with brick. Here's the streets that are brick that we might replace with other materials. All that's incorporated in the same presentation. You look through all the street lists, you say, okay, go ahead. This is good, bid this out. You get the bids in, but at some point you need to know what you're bidding out. Are you bidding out, what are you replacing it with? So at some point you need a list, to say, what are you bidding?
But why wouldn't we have that? If we know we're spending $700,000 every year, the task for you all would be to determine the streets in which we would spend $700,000.
So with your.
And that would happen
yeah.
the next year, but the next year.
So
the next
you're
year-
suggesting adding 700,000 in our frame of reference here, add 700,000 to the existing street budget program every year. And we're basically maintaining everything.
Correct. And then over time, the task is, give us the list of streets that fits that budget. That's it. And then that list of streets can be 5, it could be 10, whatever happens to be the framework we put in place. If it's low PCI, if that's the best way to get to that, then that's how we get to
Are
it.
you saying 700,000 additional budget or total budget, just a number?
I'm just saying, whatever,
You're just
I don't
saying
know
any
what the number
number.
is. What I'm
Okay,
saying is that's
awesome.
the way we should do it, in my opinion. That makes a lot of sense to me, and then it gets rid of this bickering each cycle about the number and which streets we do.
So if we did it that proposal way, then we probably would just never touch the alleys. We'd leave them brick, they'd deteriorate, they'd be undrivable. And
Our alleys.
their alleys, who cares?
I would argue that if we're saying we're gonna have 700,000 per year, then we're saying everything gets replaced with brick. Because we're setting, if we think the annualized incremental cost of brick every year is 610, we're setting aside 700,000.
Well, he's not saying 700, he just said X number. X dollar.
Well, that next dollar is to say, one, if it's, let's say, the 505. I think we need to give some, the dollar value, yes, that's one answer to the question. But the dollar value also, as you see, ties into keep us brick, don't keep us brick, what I think there is. And again, there may be 3 votes to say keep everything, at which point we're done, we move on. If there aren't 3 votes for keep everything, if there are 3 votes for a divided answer here. I mean, the divided segment, I'm just saying, it's not keep everything. Then, okay, what is that? But I think we need to get to what is something that 3 commissioners can agree to for the plan. We're out of time to have that. My
Yeah.
suggestion is at this point to say, let's stop here, let's think about
Pause
it.
on that, okay.
And then we'll bring this back to another discussion session, to go from there. Is that enough? Do we need to, having said that, do we need separately to say, approve this draft? Or does this draft have to be specifically
I just
tied
have
to this
one
list?
thing with the draft.
The list is attachment A to the draft.
All right, then we can't. And.
So we'll bring it back.
So, all right,
make
so
your
this will come back again.
Yeah.
Thank you to Matt for the presentation, unless you have.
Yes.
No, I'll ask Matt after it's about software.
Okay, awesome. All right, thank you very much. All right, thank you, gentlemen, appreciate it. We're gonna,
Danny, I'm gonna push you to next meeting.
yeah, sorry.
Coming back, buddy.
What we had to do to get an attendance, we just didn't like people to talk. Last but not least, we're doing a quick IDA meeting, so we pull out your notes for the IDA meeting.
Yes,
Share with you, because I can't find mine.
Yeah, I can't find my,
You just hold it for the sucker. Okay.
there it is. Okay. All right, so we will call to order the IDA meeting,
Thank you, Mr. President.
Mr. Reedy, item 2.
Consideration of minutes from the meeting on February 14th, 2023. I move to approve the minutes.
They've been moved and seconded. All in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no, motion carried. Public comment, anyone? All right, no public comment, report the manager, report, please.
There's no new activity since the last time the ID met. Therefore, the balance sheet is relatively unchanged. The following are the dates for the remainder of the meetings in 2023, which would be August 8th and November 14th.
All righty, any other questions, comments? Otherwise, we are adjourned and we'll see you next time.
Wow, you actually gave us 5 extra minutes. What?
I thought-
We're doing-